Hey guys, we are in chapter 7. I'm back in my therapy room, one of the therapy rooms. I'm hoping at some point to show you the different rooms that we use here in this group practice. We have some incredible play therapy spaces. I'm hoping to show you that in the next week's videos. So stay tuned, but let's get into chapter 7. Oh, here, I said something about showing you the space. So here is one of our little spaces. We're in the middle of a renovation right now, so this is just a temporary but cozy space. Okay, here we go. So, eliminating counterproductive communication patterns and substituting positive alternatives. So, the big idea with chapter 7 is wanting to help can sometimes lead us to respond in ways that cause a client to shut down. And so there are a bunch of traps that the chapter talks about. And so for just a moment, I'm going to cover each of these different traps, if you will. I'm going to give an example. I'm going to give a why it can be problematic, and then an example of a better response. Okay. So let's start with the communication barrier of premature advice. Okay, so an example in social work practice for premature advice could be something like the client stating, I'm overwhelmed trying to work and take care of my mom. And the social worker responds by saying, well, you should probably ask your siblings to come over and help with some of the caregiving. Okay, why is this problematic? Well, it jumps to solving the problem before fully understanding the client's circumstances or feelings or preference. Maybe that's not a good option for the client, or maybe that's not even what they're wanting, right? That they're just venting to you. A better response would be, it sounds like you're carrying a lot of weight right now. What's been the hardest part for you? Okay, so maybe we'll eventually get to a solution, an intervention, an idea, a suggestion, but we're not there just yet. We have a lot of exploration to get to. So, avoiding premature advice can be extremely helpful. The next communication barrier is excessive questioning, which I mentioned in the last chapter when I was talking about like making it feel like it's an interrogation. So, here's an example. When did this start? How often did it happen? What'd your husband say? What did you say? Were the kids there? What happened next? It's like, these are a lot of questions. And it can make the interaction feel like an interrogation, right? Rather than having a conversation. And this may prevent the client from telling their story in their own way. So, again, it's that idea of being quiet and letting the client share what they want to before you jump in with questions. So, a better response might be something like, tell me a little bit more about what was happening and when things became difficult at home. Okay. The next communication barrier is minimizing. So, example, a client says, I failed 2 classes and I feel like my whole future is falling apart. And then the social worker says, well, it's only 2 classes. You can retake them. Okay. So, why is this problematic? It dismisses the social or emotional significance of the experience of the client. And maybe a more appropriate response could be something like, well, this feels like a major setback to you, especially because school is so important to your plans, right? So it's providing that validation that the client needs to hear rather than a minimizing type response. Next is false reassurance. So, example, the client says, I'm terrified that my cancer is going to come back. And the social worker says, I'm sure everything is going to be fine. Okay, problematic because we're offering a promise that the social worker cannot make, and it can shut down discussion of legitimate fear that the client may be having. So, a more appropriate response could be, well, that sounds frightening. What worries you the most when you think about the cancer returning? So, again, our job is to help process, not make false reassurances that really, quite frankly, we cannot make. The next communication barrier is judging. Okay, here's an example. The client says, I went back to my partner even though I said I wouldn't. And the social worker says, well, you know that's not a good decision. Okay. Why is this problematic? It places the social worker in the role of deciding what is right or what is wrong, and it might even shame the client or provoke defensiveness. So, a more appropriate response could be something like, well, what was happening for you to decide to go back? Again, it's an open ended question that allows the client to provide an answer or clarification or exploration rather than you providing a judgmental response. Next is blaming. So, example, client states, my landlord is threatening to evict me because I'm 3 months behind on my rent. And the social worker says, well, why didn't you ask for help before you got this far behind? So, why is this problematic? It suggests that the client's situation is primarily the result of their own failure, and it can absolutely interfere with rapport. The client then starts to think, like, this is completely their fault, and they're stupid. They were lazy. They shouldn't have X, Y, or Z, and we really don't want to go down that rabbit hole with a client, especially if they're already having anxiety over an issue. A more appropriate response could be something like, it sounds like things have been building for a while. What has made it difficult to seek assistance before now? Okay. And all of these responses are going to lead to other, eventually, hopefully, solutions, interventions, uh, exploring things and coming to revelations that the client may need to have. But these are all ways that we can continue to maintain trust and rapport in the relationship, and not be judgmental. Another communication barrier or problem could be changing the subject. So here's an example. The client says, sometime since my husband died, I wonder if there's even a reason for me to get out of bed. And the social worker says, well, have you been able to get out and spend time with friends? Okay, so why is this problematic? Well, it avoids the emotion. And here in this example, potentially safety, it's avoiding safety information, right? The client is communicating that they're having a hard time getting out of bed, and we've passed over that possible depression, potential suicidality, isolation, and we've gone to something else. We've changed that subject. So a more appropriate response could be something like, well, I wonder if there's, or when you say, you wonder whether there's a reason to get out of bed, I want to understand that better. So tell me what those moments are like for you, right? So we're staying in the moment, we're not changing the subject, and we're exploring the initial statement of what the client said about wondering if there's even a reason for her to get out of bed. Another communication barrier, and this is the last one that I'll touch on, is accusatory why questions. Okay, so here's an example. The client says, I stopped taking my medication a few weeks ago. And the social worker states, well, why would you stop taking your medication? Okay, why is this problematic? Well, why can sound like you defend your behavior to me, right? Even if it's unintended, tone can communicate criticism or disbelief. And so a more appropriate response could be something like, well, tell me what was going on when you stopped or when you decided to stop taking your medication. Okay. So it's not necessarily the words themselves, but it's what they communicate in context when we're working with individuals. So, for example, asking questions is essential in the work we do. We've got to get information so we understand. The problem is the excessive questioning that prevents active listening. So again, our best, number one, most important skill when we're in the therapy room with a client is to be an active listener and picking up on these cues, these words, these tiny little sentences, nonverbals. Similarly, a why question isn't automatically bad, but why did you do that can easily sound judgmental. So again, it goes back to what we're really trying to communicate and how. Here's another good example, okay? And I'm going to go through these different communication barriers again. So the client states, I started drinking again last weekend. All right, so these are some different responses that demonstrate several barriers all at once. So if we're giving advice, we might say, you need to start going back to AA. Okay, so again, that's a communication barrier. We're preemptively giving advice that maybe the client is not ready to hear, or there's more exploring to do. Questioning. Well, how much did you drink? Where? Who are you with? What time did you start? How long did you drink? Right? So again, the interrogation. Minimizing. Well, at least it was only one weekend. Yeah, but if that client's having a drinking issue or substance abuse issue, one weekend may actually be a big deal. We've got to talk about that. We have to confront that with our client. False reassurance. Well, don't worry, you'll get back on track. Well, we can't reassure that to the client because what if they don't, right? So we have to be realistic and avoid false reassurance. Judging. Well, you knew drinking again was a bad choice, right? So that puts blame on the client. It makes them feel like they're in trouble. They've got their tail between their legs. We don't really want to make our clients feel like that when they're with us. Blaming. You were doing so well. Why did you let this happen? Right? So, again, kind of that same feeling about feeling judged. They feel like they're in trouble. We don't want our clients to feel that way. It's different to confront an actual issue versus putting a client down or blaming. Changing the subject. Well, how are things going at work? Okay, wait, hold on. We got to go back to the drinking statement. That's really important right now in this moment. Accusatory. Why? So why would you start drinking again after being sober for 6 months? Again, that sounds judgmental. It's blaming. It's very accusatory. So a therapeutic alternative to all of these problematic communication barriers could be something like, you've been working really hard on your sobriety. Something's changed last weekend. Tell me what was going on. Tell me what was happening for you last weekend. Okay, this demonstrates empathy, reflection, curiosity, and it gives the client self-determination without us immediately trying to fix the problem. Okay, so you don't have to have the perfect answer to be helpful. Sometimes we can just say, I wonder, and sit with that. The client is going to start processing and they're going to start talking and thinking for themselves, which is what we really want to facilitate. One thing to remember, helping is not the same as fixing. Okay, see you soon.